She entered his room at night by mistake, and her eyes could not believe what she saw, because in that quiet hour when the great alien station floated in silence above the dead star, no one expected the human to be awake. The story of that night was the beginning of something far greater, a meeting that would change the fate of two different worlds. On the station where endless metal walls stretched into infinity, where no stars gave warmth, and where silence often felt heavier than chains, a young alien girl named Lyra wandered down the wrong passage. She thought she was moving toward the storage bay to deliver her training records, but instead she touched a door that hissed open and revealed a small chamber she had never seen before. And inside that chamber, she froze, her breath trapped. In her chest, her heart pounding like 1,000 drums, because there was a figure unlike anything she had ever seen so close. A creature her people called dangerous, a being they warned her never to face. It was the human, sitting alone in his cell, his eyes burning with quiet fire. Ethan had been awake for hours. Sleep never came easy to him in this cold place, where every wall reminded him he was far from Earth, far from the voices of his people, far from the warmth of a sky filled with stars he knew. The station belonged to the alien race who studied him, who treated him like both a threat and an experiment. He was the only human here, a prisoner wrapped in silence. Yet he never lowered his head. Even when the guards whispered that humans were fragile, even when the council declared that his kind were better erased than remembered, Ethan sat with his back straight, his mind alive with memories of Earth, his heart refusing to surrender. On that night, when the door opened and when he saw the figure of a young alien step inside, he thought it was just another guard, another scientist. But then he saw her face. She was not like the others. She was younger, her eyes wider, filled with surprise instead of hate. The air between them felt heavy. Lyra had been told many stories. Humans were monsters, dangerous, violent creatures that could not be trusted. But what she saw that night did not match the fear her teachers planted in her mind. She saw a man sitting quietly, his face tired yet calm, his eyes deep like the oceans of old tales. She could not move. Her hands trembled. She wanted to turn back, to close the door, to run. Yet something inside her held her in place. The human spoke, his voice steady, low, carrying a weight that touched her heart. "You are lost," he said softly, not with anger, but almost with a strange kindness. She gasped at the sound, because she had never heard a human voice before, and it was not the roar of a beast as she expected, but something warm, human, alive. Ethan studied her. She was smaller than most of the guards. Her clothing marked her as a trainee, maybe still in learning. Her hands shook, her face pale in the dim glow of the lights. He could see her fear. He did not want to frighten her more, but he also knew this moment was rare. For months, maybe years, he had been treated like a shadow, like a creature to be caged. And now here was one of them, staring at him not as a monster, but as something unknown, something that made her wonder. He leaned forward just slightly, not enough to scare her, but enough to show he was real. "You do not need to be afraid," he said. "I will not harm you." The words sank deep into her heart. They were forbidden words, dangerous words, because if anyone knew she was standing here, if anyone heard the human speaking to her, punishment would follow. Still, her feet did not move. She whispered, almost to herself, "You speak like us." Ethan gave a small nod. "I am not so different," he replied. And in that instant she realized something the council never wanted her to believe. He was not a monster. He was a man. The chamber was filled with a strange silence, but not the heavy silence of the empty halls. This silence was alive, filled with questions neither of them could speak aloud. Lyra looked at his hands, strong but resting calmly on his knees, and she thought of the stories her elders told her. Stories where humans destroyed worlds, burned skies, broke empires. But she saw none of that here. What she saw was a prisoner, a man far from home, holding on to something she could not understand. It made her chest tighten, her mind spin with confusion. The station lights flickered in the hallway outside, warning of curfew. Lyra knew she had only seconds to choose to leave and pretend that this never happened, or to stay one moment longer and see what else her eyes might learn. Her breath caught, and against every lesson she had been taught, she asked, "Why? Are you here?" The human looked at her, and his gaze was so steady, so unshaken, that her knees almost gave way. "Because they fear me," he said, his voice carrying both pain and pride. "Because they fear what humans can endure." The words struck her like lightning. She felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted. For all her life, she had believed humans were weak and dangerous because they lacked control. But in his words she heard something else, something that sounded like strength. She stepped back quickly, her hand on the doorframe, torn between duty and a growing pull inside her heart. She wanted to ask more, but the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from far down the hall. Guards. She knew she had to leave before anyone saw. Her eyes widened as she looked at him one last time, and in that single glance, disbelief and curiosity burned bright inside her. Then she slipped out the door, and the chamber closed with a hiss, leaving Ethan alone once more, though now he was not truly alone. He knew someone had seen him not as a monster, but as a man. That night was only the beginning. A mistake that would become a secret that would turn into a choice, and a choice that would one day change the fate of both human and alien kind. And as Lyra walked back to her quarters, her chest still racing, her hands still trembling, she whispered to herself words she could not forget. His eyes. His eyes were not like anything I have ever seen before. The night after Lyra's mistake should have been like any other night on the station. The halls should have been silent, the chambers locked, the guards patrolling as they always did. But for her, nothing was the same anymore. She had seen the human with her own eyes, had heard his voice, had felt the weight of his words sink into her chest. She tried to forget. She told herself it was nothing, that she had only walked into the wrong room and nothing more. Yet her mind replayed the scene again and again. His calm gaze, his quiet strength, his promise that he would not harm her, all of it fought against everything she had been taught since childhood. When the curfew ended and the station woke to its usual rhythm, Lyra could hardly focus on her training. The instructors spoke of duty, of obedience, of watching for danger, but she kept hearing the human's voice instead. She remembered how he said he was there because they feared him, and the thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. If he was so dangerous, why had he sat there so quietly, not chained to the wall, not screaming or fighting, but calm like someone who carried storms inside his chest, but refused to let them break free? By the time night returned, her heart had already made its decision. She told herself she would only look once more, only check that he was real and not some trick of her imagination, and then she would leave forever. But deep down she knew it was not true. She wanted to see him again, to hear that voice again, to feel that strange mix of fear and fascination that had awakened something new inside her. And so, when the station fell into silence, she walked the halls again, her steps soft and careful, her eyes darting to make sure no one was watching. When she touched the door of his chamber, it hissed open just as before, and there he was, sitting on the bench against the wall, awake as if he had been waiting. His head turned slowly, his eyes locking with hers, and in that instant she felt both exposed and drawn closer. She nearly turned to run, but he spoke first. "You came back," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying something almost like relief. Lyra's throat tightened. I should not be here," she whispered, her body tense with fear, but her feet would not move. Ethan nodded slowly. "I know," he answered, "but you are." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, studying her carefully. "Why?" The question struck her harder than she expected. She did not know how to answer. She could not say it was curiosity, or that it was the need to see if his eyes still burned like before, or that her heart would not let her rest until she returned. So she said nothing, and instead stepped closer to him, only a little, her breath trembling. "I thought humans were different," she finally managed out. Ethan tilted his head, his gaze never leaving her. "Different how?" "Dangerous, savage, without control," she admitted, her words heavy with the lessons she had heard all her life. "But you are not like that. You are calm." His lips curved into the smallest of smiles, though it carried no joy. "That is what they want you to believe, but I am human. And humans are more than the stories they tell you." The chamber grew heavy with silence again, but this time it was not awkward. It was filled with questions that she had never dared to think before. Lyra's eyes fell on his hands again, those human hands that seemed so strange yet so steady. She wondered what they had done, what they had built, what they had held. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "What is your name?" Her eyes widened in shock. No one had ever asked her that with such gentleness before, not even among her own people. She hesitated, but something about his gaze told her she could trust him. "Lyra," she whispered. He nodded once, as if holding the name carefully in his memory. "Lyra," he repeated softly. "I am Ethan." The sound of his name felt like a spark inside her. It made him real, not just a shadow of fear, not just a prisoner, but a person. She did not realize how close she had stepped until she felt the warmth of his presence, and for a moment she panicked, pulling back quickly. "If they find me here, I will be punished," she said in a rush, her voice shaking. "Then why risk it?" Ethan asked quietly. His words carried no judgment, only curiosity. She could not answer. She only knew that something inside her needed to be here, needed to see him. It was not just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something she could not name. Night after night she returned. At first she stayed only minutes, whispering questions about humans, about Earth, about the stories of oceans and forests and skies filled with endless stars. Ethan told her of music, of laughter, of pain and loss, of wars that tested humanity, and still left them standing. He spoke not like a soldier, not like a monster, but like a man who carried a whole world inside his chest. The more she listened, the more her heart ached. She realized that her people had hidden the truth from her, that they feared not human savagery, but human strength. A strength that came not only from muscles or weapons, but from spirit, from the refusal to surrender. One night when she lingered, longer than she should have, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Her chest tightened in terror. If she was caught, there would be no forgiveness. She turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "Do not run too fast," he whispered. "Fear will betray you faster than noise." His words guided her steps as she slipped into the shadows, her heart racing. She barely made it back to her quarters before the guards passed by. She lay awake the rest of the night, her mind filled with him, her chest filled with a fear that was no longer of him but of being discovered. As the days turned to weeks, her visits grew bolder. She began to smile at his words, to laugh quietly at his strange stories, to feel something she had never felt before, something dangerous and beautiful all at once. And one night, as she turned to leave, she whispered the question that had been burning inside her for so long. "Why are they so afraid of you?" Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching, but his silence before answering was heavier than any words. Finally he said, "Because they know what humans can endure. And they know that no matter how much they chain us, we rise again." Lyra's breath caught. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of fear and wonder. And in her heart she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The days on the station moved like endless shadows, each one the same as the last, yet, for Ethan and Lyra, time had started to carry a new rhythm. What began as a mistake, then as curiosity, had now become something deeper. Each night, when silence covered the great halls and the guards grew careless in their routines, Lyra found herself returning to his chamber. She came with fear in her chest but left with a strange warmth, as though every word he spoke added light to the cold darkness of the station. At first she thought she only wanted to know about humans, to see with her own eyes if the stories were true, but now she wanted to know him, to hear his voice, to feel the calm strength that seemed to surround him like a shield. Each story he told of Earth, of oceans that moved like living things, of winds that sang across mountains, of stars that belonged not to one people but to all, made her feel smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because her world had been so limited, built on fear and obedience. Larger because he was opening a door in her mind she never knew existed. But with that new light came new shadows, and the more she listened, the more she began to see the cracks in the walls of lies her leaders had built. One night, she asked again the question that haunted her since the first time she met him. Why do they fear you so much? Why do they lock you here when you do nothing to fight them? Ethan leaned back, his eyes reflecting the dim glow of the chamber lights. For a long moment he said nothing, and she felt the silence press against her chest. Then he spoke, his words heavy with memory. Because of what humans have already endured. Because of what we survived when no one believed we could. She waited, her heart pounding, and he began to tell her. He spoke of Earth's last great war, when nations fell and skies burned, when the air itself turned to ash and oceans boiled with fire. The aliens had watched from the dark edges of the galaxy, certain that humanity would destroy itself, certain that nothing would remain but smoke and silence. But humanity did not die. Broken cities rose again, scarred survivors learned to rebuild, and families carried their children forward even when there was nothing left but hunger and cold. We were not the strongest, Ethan said, his voice carrying both sorrow and pride. We were not the smartest, but we did not stop. We do not stop. That is what they fear. Lyra's throat tightened as she listened. She imagined her own people placed in that same storm of fire and ruin, and she knew many would have surrendered, would have bent their knees, would have given up. But he told her humanity never bowed, that even when the world ended around them, they rose from the ruins. Her eyes burned with tears she did not understand. She had been taught all her life to see humans as wild beasts, but the man before her spoke not as a beast, but as someone who carried pain carved deep into his soul, and yet wore it like armor. She whispered, her voice trembling, "They call your kind dangerous, but it is not because of rage, is it? It is because of hope." Ethan met her eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, his lips curved into a true smile. "Yes," he said simply, "hope scares them more than any weapon." The words settled inside her like a storm, breaking apart everything she once believed. She thought of her instructors, of the guards, of the leaders who spoke with fear in their voices whenever they mentioned humans. She thought of the way they warned her never to look too long into human eyes, never to trust their words, never to imagine them as more than dangerous animals. And now she understood. They were not afraid of destruction. They were afraid of survival. They were afraid of the fire that refused to die. That same night, her world shattered further. She had been walking back to her quarters after leaving his room when she heard voices echoing from a council chamber. The doors were half open, the light spilling into the hallway. She froze, her heart racing, and leaned closer, just enough to hear. The council was meeting, their voices sharp and filled with anger. They spoke of the human, of Ethan, of how he had been kept alive only to study, but had grown too calm, too strong in spirit, too dangerous even in chains. He must be erased before the others come looking, one voice declared. If humanity still lingers among the stars, they must never find him alive. His survival will give them courage. Her chest turned to ice. She held her breath as she listened to the decision being made. The order was simple. Within days, perhaps within hours, the human would be eliminated. Not questioned, not studied, but silenced forever. She staggered back from the door, her legs shaking. She wanted to scream, but the fear locked her throat. The walls seemed to close in, every shadow suddenly an enemy. She ran through the corridors, her mind spinning, her body trembling as though the floor itself might vanish beneath her. She did not stop until she reached his chamber, her hands slamming against the door, her breath broken and fast. Ethan rose from the bench when he saw her. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled forward. "They are coming," she gasped. "They are going to kill you." For the first time since she had known him, she saw his calm face shift. His eyes hardened, his body tensed. He stepped closer, steadying her by the shoulders. "When?" "Tonight," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They said tonight." The weight of her words filled the chamber like a storm. Ethan's hands tightened gently but firmly on her shoulders. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with fire. "Then we have no time." Lyra's tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She had never felt such fear, not for herself, but for him. The thought of losing him, of never hearing his voice again, tore at her chest in a way she could not understand. She clutched his arm, her voice desperate. "You cannot stay here. You must escape, please." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the battle inside him, the part of him that wanted to protect her by sending her away, and the part of him that knew he could not do this alone. Finally, he nodded. "Then we leave together," he said. Her heart pounded, fear and hope twisting inside her all at once. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had betrayed her people, her training, her duty. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that she would not let him fall. And as the alarms began to echo faintly through the station, announcing the gathering of guards, Lyra and Ethan stood in the chamber together, their eyes locked, both knowing the night ahead would decide not just their fate, but something far greater. The station was alive with tension. Every corridor hummed with energy, every flicker of light a warning. Ethan and Lyra moved quietly, hearts pounding, knowing that at any moment the guards could appear. The order had been given. The human must be erased tonight, and there was no room for mistakes. Lyra's mind raced as she followed Ethan down the metal passages, her small hand gripping his arm as if letting go would mean losing him forever. For the first time, she understood fear in its rawest form. It was not just the danger of being caught, it was the possibility of losing someone she had come to care for deeply. Ethan led her through hidden corridors, passages meant for maintenance and storage, paths no regular guard would walk. The walls hummed with machinery, and vents carried the cold breath of the station through every chamber. Lyra shivered, both from the chill and from the knowledge that their every move could be their last. She glanced at him, and for a moment, fear melted into awe. He was calm, every step measured, every decision precise. Yet she could see the strength beneath, the human fire that had survived worlds and wars. He had become something more than what her people feared, something she had only just begun to understand. The closer they moved to the escape pods, the more alive the station seemed. Shadows stretched and twisted, carrying whispers of guards moving through the halls, and the hum of security drones grew louder. Lyra's heart threatened to burst in her chest, but Ethan's hand brushed hers once, lightly grounding her, and she knew they would survive if they trusted each other completely. As they turned a corner, a sudden alarm blared through the station. Red lights flooded the hall, bathing everything in a warning glow. The guards had discovered their absence. Lyra froze, panic rising, but Ethan's voice cut through her fear like steel. "Move, now." They ran, their footsteps echoing in the long corridor. The hum of drones grew louder, the sound of guards shouting in the distance shaking the walls. Every second counted. Every second could be the one that ended everything. They reached a security checkpoint, and Ethan crouched, scanning the area. "There," he whispered, pointing to a narrow service hatch beneath a console. Lyra gasped, realizing it was small, almost too tight for two, yet it was the only way. With a quick glance around, he lifted her through, helping her into the cramped passage. Her body pressed against his as they crawled through the dark tunnel, the cold metal scraping against their skin, the air thick with tension. Lyra's breath came in short bursts, but she felt a strange comfort being so close to him. In that tiny space, fear and hope mixed until they became something almost tangible. When they emerged on the other side, the corridor was nearly empty. The pods were in sight, glowing softly, each one a promise of freedom. Lyra's chest heaved as she realized they were almost there, almost safe. But as they stepped closer, a sharp sound cut through the air, a voice, familiar and chilling. Shouting her name, she froze. One of the aliens she had trusted, a fellow trainee, had seen her leave and had reported them. Her heart sank. Betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Ethan noticed her pause and tightened his grip on her hand. "Go," he whispered urgently. "I will cover you." He turned toward the approaching guards, his stance calm but his eyes sharp. Lyra wanted to protest, wanted to fight by his side, but he shook his head. "Go, I will not let them take you." She hesitated only for a moment before running toward the escape pods, fear and sorrow burning in her chest. She could hear the clash of metal and the shouts behind her, could hear Ethan fighting, and every heartbeat was a scream in her mind. She reached the pod and fumbled with the controls, her hands shaking violently. Ethan's voice called out, urging her to hurry, telling her to trust herself. Finally, the pod doors sealed, and she pressed the launch sequence. The pod shot forward, sliding along the rails, and as it detached from the station, she looked back. Ethan was still there, facing the swarm of guards, his eyes locked on her as if to give her one last piece of courage. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not look away. She had to survive. He had taught her the strength of hope. Inside the pod, the silence was different. It was not the silence of the station, heavy and oppressive, but a quiet filled with motion, with the rush of wind and the hum of engines. Lyra pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the station shrink behind her, glowing red alarms marking the fury of those left inside. And in that moment, she realized the depth of what she had done. She had betrayed her people, risked everything, and yet she could not regret it. She had chosen a human, chosen hope, chosen a bond that neither species could have understood before. That night, but the danger was not over. Ethan was still inside, fighting for every breath, every second, every heartbeat. Lyra's hands shook as she gripped the console. She could not reach him, could not protect him, and yet she knew he would survive because he had to. Humans survived when all hope was gone. That was what she had learned, and it was what gave her strength now. Minutes passed like hours. Every alarm, every shadow outside the pod made her heart race. And then, through the small communication screen, she saw him. Ethan had made it to another corridor, still fighting, still standing tall against impossible odds. Relief and fear collided inside her. She whispered his name, though he could not hear her. She would wait. She would survive, and together they would find a way. The station shrank further behind her pod. And Lyra realized that nothing would ever be the same. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, had chosen a path of rebellion and loyalty to a being no one understood. Her heart beat with hope and fear intertwined, and for the first time, she felt truly alive in the cold void of space. As the pod moved further from the station, the alarm still echoing faintly behind, Lyra made a silent vow. She would not let this end in loss. She would not let the human she had come to care for be defeated. Whatever came next, whatever trials awaited them, she would face them. And together they would rise. The station, full of noise and fury, began to fade into the darkness. But the human spirit, alive and unbroken, remained with her, and deep inside. She knew that their story was only beginning. The stars stretched endlessly before them, black and cold, yet filled with the possibility of life. Lyra's pod moved steadily through space, the faint hum of the engines vibrating under her hands. She pressed her forehead against the glass, remembering every moment of the night that had changed everything, the mistake that had brought her to Ethan's chamber, the whispered words, the laughter, the fear, the battle for escape. And now, as the station disappeared behind them, she felt both relief and dread. Relief because they had survived, dread because Ethan was still out there, still facing impossible odds to reach her dot. She could not stand idly by. Lyra accessed the pod's communication link, her hands trembling as she sent a signal into the darkness. She hoped, prayed, that Ethan would hear it. Moments passed like hours. Then, finally, a response came, faint but clear. His voice, steady and strong, cut through the void. "I hear you, I'm coming." Her heart leapt. He had survived. He had fought through the storm, and he was moving toward her. The station loomed. Behind them, red lights flashing, guards in pursuit, alarms screaming into the empty halls. But Ethan was unstoppable. He moved with determination, every step a testament to the human spirit that refused to bow. Lyra's hands gripped the controls tighter, guiding the pod closer to a pre-programmed escape corridor that would lead them into open space. She could see him now, a figure moving with courage and strength against impossible odds, and she realized fully why her people had feared humans. Not because they destroyed, not because they fought, but because they endured, because they rose. When others would fall, because they carried hope, even into the darkest night. The pod trembled as it approached a docking corridor outside the station. Lyra felt fear clawing at her chest. The alarms were deafening now, the drones swarming like mechanical predators. Yet she refused to panic. Ethan had taught her that humans survived because they did not surrender to fear. She mirrored him, steadying herself, guiding the pod along the path he had fought to clear. Then, through the small viewport, she saw him. Ethan reached the docking hatch, his body battered, his clothes torn, but his eyes still burned with that quiet fire she had come to. No. He looked up at her, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. No words were spoken, but everything passed between them, the relief, the fear, the triumph, the bond that had grown stronger than fear or duty. She opened the hatch from inside the pod. He climbed in, and as their hands met, a spark of hope and strength surged between them. They had escaped the station, but danger was far from over. The alarms still blared, the guards still pursued, and the cold void of space waited to test them. Lyra guided the pod through asteroid fields and debris, Ethan checking the systems, both of them working as one. Every obstacle was met with courage, every shadow with determination. And all the while, they spoke little, because words were unnecessary. Their actions, their trust, their shared breath in the cold, carried the story of survival more than any voice could. Finally, as the station shrank into the distance, Ethan looked at Lyra. "We need to get far from here," he said. "They will send ships after us, and we cannot outrun them forever." But there is hope. Lyra's eyes searched his, and she knew that no hope had ever felt so real, so alive, so powerful. Minutes later, as they navigated through space, a new light appeared on the horizon. At first, it was a small glimmer, almost like a star, but then it expanded, revealing shapes and vessels she had never imagined. A fleet of ships, human ships, powerful and precise, moving through the darkness with silent grace. Ethan's eyes softened, but his gaze burned with pride. "They've been waiting," he said quietly. "Watching, waiting for the right moment. We are not alone." Lyra's heart swelled with awe and disbelief. She had never seen anything like it. The humans had returned, stronger than the alien council had imagined, ready to face the galaxy with courage and strength. She realized fully why they had feared humans, why they had tried to erase him. Humans did not surrender. Humans did not bow. Humans carried this spark of hope that no darkness could extinguish. The pod docked with one of the larger ships, and they entered the deck together. Ethan and Lyra stood side by side, looking at the fleet that stretched endlessly into the void. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt that the impossible was possible, that hope could survive even the cruelest fate. She touched Ethan's hand, a silent gesture of trust, of bond, of everything that had grown between them in the nights of fear and quiet conversation. "This is just the beginning," Ethan said. His voice was calm but strong. "We will return. For the station, for everyone held there, and we will show them that humans do not break, humans do not surrender, humans survive. We rise, always." Lyra nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She had crossed worlds, betrayed her people, risked everything, and yet she had never felt more alive. She had witnessed the human spirit in its purest form, and it had changed her forever. The fear, the danger, the betrayal, all of it had led her here, to this moment, standing with the man she had once thought so strange, now her ally, her friend. Perhaps even more. The fleet moved silently, yet its presence was deafening in meaning. Every ship, every light, every signal was a testament to survival, to endurance, to hope. And as they looked forward, the dark void of space stretched endlessly, but now it was not empty. It was alive with possibilities, with promise, with the courage to face whatever came next. Ethan turned to Lyra, his gaze steady, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Whatever comes, we face it together," he said. She nodded, feeling a warmth she had never known in the cold void. Together, they had survived. Together they had escaped. And together, they would rise against any darkness the galaxy could send. And in the distance, the alien station grew smaller, a relic of fear and control. A place where humans were once thought weak. Now it was nothing more than a reminder of what humans could endure, what hope could survive, and what spirit could rise. Ethan and Lyra, two beings from different worlds, had survived the impossible, had chosen courage over fear, had found trust in the shadows, and had emerged into light stronger than either could have imagined alone. The stars stretched before them, endless and full of promise. And as the fleet moved with silent precision, carrying them toward freedom and a future unwritten, one truth became clear. Humans endure. Humans rise. Humans survive. And those who witness it, who dare to trust it, are forever changed. The end.